A listener on the Facebook page is raising the point in regards to Superman. Doesn't Superman fight for human rights for each issue? This is an outrage to give him the opposite job.
Well, that's what I wonder about, is I wonder where DC Comics is going with this. Because they've tried to make the argument that the personal views of the writer shouldn't matter.
And I think that's a reasonable point.
I think that's a good point, and I think the minute you take a board position on the National Organization for Marriage, they stop being personal views. Like, I wouldn't, because I feel I've been so public and because I've contributed to gay causes, I wouldn't consider my views on gay marriage to be personal. I would say, I think activist is a title I wouldn't necessarily give myself because I think it's an honor, and I think we too often call people activists in this day and age. But I've been very public, and I see his behavior as having been just as public, and I would call him an anti-gay activist. I'd call anybody who's worked for the National Organization of Marriage an anti-gay activist. And so a different question needs to be posed to DC Comics. It's, why have you hired a public anti-gay activist to write Superman?
Yeah, I think that is a reasonable point, but on the other hand, how can the personal views of that person not color how he's going to tell the story?
Right.
And so I think it's getting shaded now. They want to shade Superman in a different direction than he's been shaded before.
Is that really the conscious decision of DC? I mean, I think that's...
I don't know, but that's what, you know...
I'm not as familiar with his writing. Does it shade his other work?
Well, I've had a lot of response on Facebook to my various postings about this, and people say you can't really tell this from his other writings. His more recent nonfiction writings, his essays, are where he has really espoused these views. He's written for a lot of conservative websites.
Right.
He really does believe that this will be the end of civilization, as I've said, the quotes that we've quoted earlier in the broadcast. Ender's Game, his classic novel, apparently doesn't have a trace of homophobia in it that anybody picked up on before this really became an issue around his career. One novel, somebody said, was so homoerotic, they assumed he was gay. Orson Scott Card. So, yeah, it seems to be a complicated, evolving issue if you look at it just from the perspective of his published works.